Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This will truly be the golden age of America. This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
So that was Donald Trump declaring his victory in Florida. Trump has won the US presidential election age 78, winning a second term in a dramatic comeback. How will America's 47th president change the world? And what will it mean for Britain and Europe? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Yuan. Welcome to the programme. So in the end, it wasn't as close as the polls suggested. We're some way from the detail of the final result, but it's very clear that Donald Trump has secured a convincing win and another 4 years in the White House. Investors have been buying stocks and selling US bonds in the expectation of more growth but higher inflation. But what will Trump 2.0 mean for us here in the UK?
Yeah, indeed. And on foreign policy, the former president wants a resolution of the Russia-Ukraine war. We know that he still thinks NATO allies aren't pulling their weight, or more precisely, paying their fair share. Domestically, he's clear that he is pro-fossil fuels and anti-green energy. And then, of course, there's what he's called the most beautiful word in the dictionary. How much should the UK and the rest of the world be worried about the threat of tariffs? Joining us to discuss, who better than Bloomberg's UK Economy and Government Managing Editor, Brendan Scott, and in Brussels, our Bureau Chief, Kevin Whitelaw. Kevin was also Deputy Managing Editor for US Government under the last Trump presidency. So extremely familiar then with Trump as he returns to the White House. Welcome to both of you and thank you for being with us. Kevin, can I start with you? Macron, Scholz, Keir Starmer have all laid out warm words of congratulations for Donald Trump. What do you think they're really thinking?
Well, obviously, I think everyone was as quick to congratulate them as they thought they could be once it was clear he was going to win. But one of the more interesting conversations has already happened between Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Olaf Scholz, where they did talk about the need to boost European sovereignty, and I think that's a word you're going to hear a lot more from the European side in the days and weeks ahead. At the same time, it's a time where Europe's own national politics are a bit scrambled, and you'd normally expect France and Germany to be leading the response, the political response, but both of those leaders have their own domestic troubles, and so they're both in weakened positions going into what's likely to be a pretty disruptive period here.
Brendan, threats and opportunities for the UK from a Trump presidency, but there's a long history, isn't there, with Keir Starmer and Labour, and there's comments from David Lammy back in 2017 and the feud between London's Mayor Sadiq Khan. Do you think that Keir Starmer and this government can overcome those things and make a good fist of it?
Well, I think on paper, there's probably a lot of people in the UK that will be breathing a sigh of relief or looking for silver linings on the fact that this is now an economy that is separated from Europe. That Europe very much seems to be in the crosshairs. Britain itself has a trade deficit with the U.S. A lot of its trade with the U.S. is in services, not goods. That means it's less exposed to tariffs. Britain is also one of the NATO members that has the highest level of defense spending and is meeting its 2% GDP commitment. So that all should bode well on a level playing field. But as you mentioned, we do have a history of Starmer. He's from a left-leaning party. He and several high-ranking members of his cabinet have been highly critical of Donald Trump over the years. So he's going to have to bridge that divide. And all indications are he's going in that he hasn't been able to do that so far. He had a very public spat with Trump over Labor Party activists who went over to campaign for Kamala Harris. Although that sort of thing has been going on for years, the way it came out and the way Trump decided to make an issue out of it doesn't bode well for the relationship. And of course, we also have the Elon Musk element as well, where we've seen Starmer in a very high-profile spat with Elon Musk over Twitter's content related to the far-right riots that went on in this country earlier this summer, before Elon really became a key member of the Trump campaign. But it doesn't seem like that's something that's just going to go away.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting that you talk about it being a sigh of relief. The last YouGov poll of opinions in the UK showed that actually only 18% of people in the UK wanted to see Trump elected to the White House.
And that includes Tories. I mean,
right.
People on the political right aren't enthusiastic about a second Trump presidency either.
Yeah, no, I think those are interesting points. So then in that case, let's come to the issue of tariffs. Kevin, Brussels has been preparing for Trump 2.0, including this possibility of a tariff war. Trump says that, and when he was speaking to his supporters only earlier today, he said that he would make good on his promises. What do you expect?
Look, Bloomberg editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite interviewed Trump last month. The quote was, "To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariffs." And so I think that we've all learned that you need to take Trump seriously, even if you don't always take him literally. And so I do think that he will definitely move ahead and discuss plans to do this. The question for Europe is going to be how much of this is really a negotiating tactic and how much of it is an actual plan. And I think that that's going to take a little bit of time to fully suss out as it goes forward. But Europe has to be ready for something. They were caught off guard in Trump's first term, and they've done a lot of work to try to get themselves in a somewhat better position to be able to respond in a second one. So they've the EU has adopted some new various defensive trade measures that allow it to be a bit more nimble. And as we've been reporting, they've also been working on trying to come up with sort of a plan for what they'd target if on the US side in retaliation if Trump moves ahead with things. So I do think that there's a recognition they need to be a lot more ready than they were last time, but already see in some of the reactions in European stocks, particularly among German car makers, there's a huge concern about how that's all going to play out. The other X factor here for Europe is China, actually, which obviously is something that Trump has said he wants to target Chinese trade a lot. The EU is already finding itself looking a bit more critically over the years at China's trade practices. How much room there is for there to be more of a team up there and how much there isn't is going to be yet another factor as they try to figure out just how serious the threat is to a transatlantic trade war.
So tariffs and China very much on the agenda in Brussels. Brendan, for the UK, a 20% tariff on all of our US exports would be a disaster, assuming there's any chance of this happening. US is obviously our biggest export destination. How likely is that scenario, and what bargaining power does the UK really have?
Well, I mentioned the fact that the UK has a trade deficit with China, with the US, so that does theoretically improve your bargaining position. Assuming that Trump and his officials are willing to consider that. But you also have the UK is going to be faced, if all this plays out as it could potentially play out, and it's the way it's already shaping up with the US and European tariffs on Chinese EVs, is that the UK will find itself as a small open economy, like becoming the destination for all of these goods that can no longer come into those high tariffed markets. So that could be beneficial if you want to bring down the price of electric vehicles in the UK, but it could also distort the market in ways that people haven't fully appreciated. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, has signaled in recent days that she doesn't have a lot of appetite for putting up tariffs. It doesn't see that that's much of an option for the UK on its own. That may not be a choice that she can fully make independently, but it's going to be a real difficult ride. I mean, it could be that we see, this having some disinflationary pull in the UK as well.
In terms of the UK's relationship with the US, the long-desired trade deal, is there a possibility that it's back on the table? And we also have the situation of who to send to the US as ambassador for Britain. Again, Nigel Farage was one of the people actually celebrating the Trump victory. Is there a strong case for it to be Farage?
there may be a case for it, but I don't know if that's one that anyone in the Labour government would be willing to listen to. I mean, we've heard names floating around of David Miliband or Peter Mandelson. The question of whether that is a viable option now is certainly you wonder how much either of those potential picks could bring to the table in a Trump presidency. It's going to be a big question. There's also a question of David Lammy's future as foreign secretary, given his past comments with Trump. They've tried to highlight how much effort they've made to reach out across the Atlantic and make ties with the Trump camp. We'll see the results of that in the coming days, potentially when Starmer travels to the G20. We'll have to see if he makes any overtures to Trump in between and what sort of response he gets.
Kevin, we've had a war on our doorstep for 2.5 years now. Trump has been clear that he wants policy on Ukraine to be different. Does he go in and do a deal with Putin in the next few months? And how does Europe react to that?
Well, obviously, I think there's probably a few countries that are more worried about what the Trump presidency means in Ukraine, and you can see in Vladimir Zelensky's initial reaction that he's trying to put the best possible spin on it. It's basically saying that, he's essentially hoping to use Trump's strength to work towards some kind of peace deal. But of course, that means, from Ukraine's perspective, they want that on their terms, not on Russia's terms. And the real concern is that Trump is going to basically weaken Ukraine's leverage, particularly if he follows through on what what appear to be his threats to cut off U.S. aid to Ukraine. So there's been a little bit of effort by the Group of 7 nations to try to Trump-proof some of the aid going to Ukraine. Hence the effort to create a loan program based on the profits of Russian frozen assets. But that's only going to last so long. Ukraine remains super reliant on U.S. military aid, particularly with Europe just not able to sort of step in and sort of make up for any loss there. And so I think that the real question is going to be how hard Trump actually presses either side, whether he can press either side, because at the same time, Vladimir Putin's going to look at the situation. He's advancing. His troops are making some gains in Ukraine. He now has Trump in the White House. Maybe suddenly there's less pressure and even less interest from Putin's side to make a deal at this point. So I think that there's as I say, there's probably almost no one more worried than Zelensky about what this means, particularly given some of the acrimonious history between him and Trump.
Kevin, thank you so much for your thoughts. Kevin Whitelaw is Bloomberg's Brussels bureau chief. And we've also been joined by Brendan Scott, Bloomberg's UK Economy and Government Managing Editor. Thank you to both of you for joining us this morning as we think about and digest Donald Trump elected as 47th president of the US. Not all the tallying is absolutely final, but he's headed to the White House. Yeah, and undoubtedly some big opportunities as well as threats for the UK, and lots of difficult decisions for the Labour government to make over this, not least tariffs, as we mentioned in the show. Some big trade policy decisions to do as well. Yeah, that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This episode was produced by James Walcock and our audio engineer was Sean Gostamakia. I'm Yuan Potts. And I'm Caroline Hepker, and we'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.